Welcome back. In the first half of The Lay of the Land, we explored our external environment. Now, we're turning inward. The abolitionist and writer Frederick Douglass once said that without struggle, there is no progress. When we think about being prepared for sudden shocks, we think about shielding or protecting ourselves to weather the storm. In fact, there's a very popular term for that: resiliency. But what if we could move beyond resiliency to something even more powerful? What if being exposed to shocks actually made us stronger? That's the theory developed by Nassim Nicholas Taleb in his seminal work, Antifragile. And after what we've just been through, it seems to resonate more than ever. Nassim will be discussing this with Cyril Vigneron, President and CEO of Cartier, in a conversation moderated by Katrine Marchal. Katrine is a journalist and award-winning author of the book, Mother of Invention: How Good Ideas Get Ignored in an Economy Built for Women. Over to you.
My name is Katrine Marchal, and I am delighted to be here with you to talk about anti-fragility. What are the things that actually gain from disorder? How can we strive to not just survive volatility, but benefit from it? Because it has been a rocky year for many of us. And the idea that we're going to be discussing today is that this volatility, this rockiness, is not something to try to resist, but something almost to embrace and definitely trying to learn from. The question, of course, is how? I am joined today by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who is the best-selling author of The Global Phenomenon, which is the book Antifragile. He's a former trader and he's an expert on risk and uncertainty. And he's joining us today from Atlanta in the US. We're also very honored to be joined by Cyril Vigneron, who is the CEO of Cartier and is joining us from Geneva in Switzerland. Nassim Nicholas Taleb, you coined this word, anti-fragile, because we needed it. What does it mean? Let's start by defining it.
Okay, there is a word for robust. There's a word called robust. There's a word to describe the property of objects that are not affected by disorder, by harm, by other things. So, but the problem is that word is imprecise because sometimes people mean things that may benefit from turmoil. So the way I reclassify things is by saying that you have the fragile, you know, it breaks under stress, it breaks under volatility, it breaks under chaos. It breaks if you try to harm it, it breaks easily. The robust doesn't care, okay, doesn't improve, doesn't degrade. Pretty much like the bird, you know, the phoenix, you shoot it, it comes back the same, okay? And then, but there is a category like Hydra, you try to harm it and it improves. And this is shared in many biological phenomena. Like, for example, you have hormesis. If you give you a little bit of poison, you're going to be better off. A lot of poison, of course, will end up harming you. So I try to classify things along these three categories. But this came from my background as a trader. Before I became an academic, I was a trader and I specialized in volatility. And we had a word for things that improve from volatility that didn't exist in other languages called long gamma. So from that background, I tried to recycle things from into the modern scientific vocabulary and try to map it mathematically, and then started writing academic papers on things that gain from disorder, what property, I call it convexity, anything that has more upside than downside eventually will gain from disorder. And of course, you start seeing the world differently once you formalize something. And I started, of course, looking at things and say, well, this benefits from a little more disorder. Effectively, if you sit on a chair for 9 months without walking, without doing any, and even worse, if you lie down, you're going to lose bone density. So a little bit of, shocks, a few shocks, a little bit is good for you. And that's what I meant by antifragile. Of course, you're going to ask me how to translate it into companies, and this is discussion today.
Yeah, I mean, so it's fascinating. So the fragile is, so it's like an egg that breaks under pressure. The robust is like I guess a big piece of stone, a rock or something. And then the antifragile, the hydra that you cut off one head and two heads come back. So Cyril Vigneron, I mean, you've been thinking quite deeply about this concept. I know it's meant quite a lot to you. Why do you find it so useful?
So first of all, I will not come into too many details now because there are many other details question afterwards. But I must say that I read Professor Taleb's book twice, and it's very dense, and both are very easy to understand as first round. And we want to apply not so easy, but we come in depth a lot of things. And I've learned to find things both on the personal life, and especially, for instance, I'm married to a Japanese. We have children and can choose in some way what do they want to have, 1 passport, 2 passports, 3 passports, something are allowed and something have to choose. But then the question can be, what can be in the future kind of anti-fragile country, for instance, when you can make that choice? Or how you can make your personal investment? Do you choose one, or do you choose both, or do you choose, how do you want to manage that on your own? And in short term or long term, when things can be quite different. But also, of course, as company leader, it takes even a different stance. Initially, the question is, say, when a crisis comes, you just don't know, and you tend to think it's unpredictable, but in fact, it comes quite frequently. And so the question, how to prepare a company to be more anti-fragile, and when a crisis comes and you find some part that you had seen and you had learned from, it was fine, but then you find new things and new reasons to be fragile that you had not seen before. And if you can bring just the fact to bring a learning culture in some way by itself, will make it anti-fragile. So many things were really, really useful and could be operated in many ways, and you constantly learn from it. So it has been useful both personal life and as a company, and I guess we'll come in more details further down this interview.
Yeah, and that's one of the key concepts, isn't it? That sort of we underestimate how much volatility is always there and guides our life. And the idea of being anti-fragile is sort of being able to benefit from that, or at least
I would say survive. Not necessarily volatility, because something can be volatile but predictable, and you can do hedging in a way which is kind of known. The point is, say, when you face something you just don't know, that come at some point with something which was not predictable, and it's more uncertainty or something, an event that comes and takes you in some way by surprise, but in some way you should not be surprised because you know they would come one day. So that's something different, how to get prepared for something you don't know.
Something you don't know. And so let's talk about that concept, Nassim Nicholas Taleb. You discuss in this book that we do not want to be like the turkey. So the turkey every day gets fed by the farmer and draws the conclusion from this data that the farmer loves the turkey because every day the farmer gives the turkey food, and then boom, Christmas comes, turkey is no more. So you coined these sort of, to the turkey, this is an unpredictable event because all the data that the turkey had showed that the farmer actually loved the turkey. But these unpredictable events, you call them black swans. Yes. And that concept of the black swan is related to antifragility. How?
Yes. The most important thing is, if you want to be anti-fragile, the first thing is to not be fragile. And you know what's going to break you. Okay, you want to survive. To make it, you must first survive. So it's a condition. You must avoid fragility, to move away from the left, which is fragile, to the center, robust, and to get to anti-fragile, you must be robust. So it's just a very simple logical relationship between these concepts. And a lot of people didn't get it. They didn't get the idea that you must avoid fragilities at all costs to be able to have more upside than downside. Now, how do you build systems that can handle black swans? Well, the first thing I'm going to say is that for many things, you can't predict what's going to happen. Okay, so you can't predict calamities, but you know how it would affect you when it happens. So the nature equipped us, for example, with redundancies. We have two kidneys. And what's the reason we have two kidneys? You don't have to predict what's going to make you lose a kidney, whether it's someone hitting you with a stick, whether it's necrosis, or whether it's lead poisoning. So you have two kidneys, you see. So I have a lot of lung capacity just in case something happens to my lungs. I got plenty left. So nature equips us with redundancies. Same thing for companies. You must have redundancies. You must be able to survive shocks. And having redundancies, which is the exact opposite of leverage. You can have a little bit of leverage, but you got to realize that leverage being the opposite of redundancy fragilizes you. So having some of these would allow you to survive shocks and benefit from them if it happens. And also it prevents you from that being put in a position where you have to be very accurate in your forecasting. Because the biggest problem we have is we can't forecast. And when you're fragile, you must forecast the future. If you're robust, at least robust, you don't have to be that precise in your forecasting. You see? So you can collect what we call options. You have more upside than downside. You benefit from what I call the cluster of randomness. The cluster of randomness, which is disorder, variation, variability, shocks, chaos. You can benefit up to a point, of course.
So being anti-fragile or having an anti-fragile business, you don't have to predict the future, which that sounds good. Cyril Vigneron, how has this, so what Nassim Nicholas Taleb is saying here is that, the easiest way to become anti-fragile is to avoid the big downsides, the black swans. It's more, if I understand it correctly, it's more important to sort of avoid these big disasters than to grow 2% more than everyone else in a situation where all businesses are growing. How has this sort of affected your thinking about business and building companies?
And I will give three very concrete examples. And the first is for the entire group and what our chairman has put in place. He said in case of big crisis, everyone is facing a cash issue. So you say, I don't care having a lazy balance sheet. I don't want to leverage. I will have a lot of cash because cash gives you time. And in most crises, the question is, how do you react? But if you have, and as we are in businesses which have a kind of inertia, it can be a problem. So, but if you have the cash, then you can find what's going on, how can I react, and it can be fine. So he said, I prefer to have a lot of cash that stays. And even if my banker said, but why don't you do things with this cash? Because I know in case of black swan, I will need it. And it's been quite fruitful in the past year, because there was a period unexpected before that from March to basically April, May, everything shut down everywhere. So anyway, there was no revenue at all. But so if you're a cash-rich company, you can go through it without dismantling anything, and it's very useful. Other example, when we had faced some overcapacity in the past, and so tried to reallocate production. The question say, well, there was a brand new building in somewhere that became unoccupied, but in an area where in somewhere where the real estate market is quite low, but kind of a state-of-the-art kind of functional environment, friendliness, and so forth. So some say, why don't you sell this building? I say, well, no one wants to buy now, and we can use to make it, and we talked about some tinkering, some research lab. Using this facility can also be a backup when these things rebound. Because when the market rebound in our industry can rebound quite fast. And because the inertia, the longest is to build walls. But if you have the walls, keep them. It's some ways kind of redundancy, but then when the market catch up, then you can be ready. So it's another example of how to do things that can work. Then third example was in a period where the kind of market dynamics would take kind of to one clientele, like say, especially Chinese customers. And when with also Chinese buying domestically and also overseas, you can say, let's focus on this one, who will get a very high revenue. But what happens if the borders get closed? What happens if there's a problem coming there? Then you also have to continue to develop all the other clienteles in Europe, in Russia, in the United States, Middle East, so that it can be in some way balanced. So it might look like a bit dilution of your investment, but when we faced something like last year, when actually the borders were closed, travel was stopped, everyone was at home, then we were kind of quote unquote fortunate to have developed clienteles who can buy at home and not to be dependent only on one. So a third example also on client management, if you think at some point something may happen that prevent people from traveling, whether a disease, whether political, social unrest, whatever, you should not be too much affected by that. And that's what we had done the past 5 years. And so as a result, we did pretty well during this crisis. The three examples, with very concrete example of what Professor Taleb said. Cash, when you can say, it may look as lazy balance sheet, keep some properties as redundancy, and develop clienteles in area that might not look the most profitable in some period, but may look very, very useful when we have incidents or crises as we have faced.
I have an anecdote that illustrates the point. Is you know, the Kennedy family was in their days one of the wealthiest families in America. The father of the President Kennedy got rich during the thanks owing to the Great Depression. Why? He had a lot of cash, so he walked around. I buy this, I buy this, I buy this, and he bought a lot of companies and a lot of real estate during the Depression, and sure enough, the thing rallied after. So I'm giving just a simple example where it's not just a defensive strategy, but it can be an aggressive strategy to win cash, because in the crisis, you can buy what you want.
Yeah, so the Kennedy fortune being a good example of the point about cash made by Cyril Vigneron as one sort of strategy that he's used, sort of, which is coherent with this concept of trying to be anti-fragile. So we've mentioned, when we're talking about things that can be predicted and things that can't be predicted. So let's talk about last year. I mean, Cyril Vigneron has already mentioned it, because Nassim Nicholas Taleb, you actually predicted a global pandemic already in your book, The Black Swan, from 2010. And you have been saying everywhere during the last year that COVID-19 was not a black swan. Why is that?
Okay, so let me tell you that something covered by Hollywood cannot be a black swan. So these scenarios, and then anybody who knows history knows about pandemics. They're about a colleague and a friend of mine who collected data and showed that it was effectively an extremely fat-tailed phenomena. That pandemics were unpredictable maybe locally, but we know that we're going to have a pandemic over the next 50 years with very high probability. But there's a difference, and I explained in the Black Swan that our environment makes pandemic vastly more dangerous and makes them spread a lot faster, because in the old days, to go from on the Silk Road from Asia to Europe, you traveled at maximum speed of 30 kilometers a day. Today, one simple conference in Las Vegas with 30,000 dentists or something like, specialists of, specific disease. They come in from all around the world. And there's a conference that gathered 120 people, from 120 countries. They come in, and within 3 days, they redistribute the entire to the entire planet. So today we're living in an environment where we have a lot more connectivity, whether cultural, whether financial, whether economic, or biological. You see, that was explained in the Black Swan, where I was talking about changes in the environment that make some what they call tail event, these events that matter a lot, that have a low probability of occurring, but when they occur, they have a huge impact. I said, but these must be white swans. It's like, we're going to have storms here in Atlanta. We know, okay. So a pilot who doesn't know about storms eventually, will crash the plane. And this is what happened with this. What's predictable is the incompetence of governments, because the big risk has been a pandemic for a long time. But meanwhile, they spent trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars on what? On nuclear weapons. Well, the danger is something you pick up at the bar. You see.
Yes. Yeah. So it's the global interconnectedness of our economy and society that makes us more fragile, right, when it comes to pandemics.
Exactly.
And I would say also some comment about what we had seen in the past 10 years. So in 2000, in our industry, in 2002 and 2003, there were the SARS, and then later on there were the MERS. So two were kind of localized, but anyway, pandemics already. And so seeing how they could spread. Then kind of financial crisis, 2008 and 2009. And then came something where China government went for anti-corruption, and this affected massively the watch consumption. Then came a devaluation of the renminbi, also affected significantly the Chinese customers. So we had things that say China can be something with ups and downs, global financial market can be, an epidemic can be. So anyway, to say it was predictable that something of such a kind might happen, or one of the three, or the three together. In this case, with the three together, it starts pandemics and economic and financial.
So this was
let me make a comment here from those who know history would realize that the elders understood a lot better what was going on than the moderns, okay? Because the ancients knew how to deal with pandemics. They had lazarettos all along. I mean, they understood that you needed to maximize profits, have a healthy economic life, but at the same time, that travelers who bring merchandise bring diseases with them. So after the 16th, 17th, 18th century, progressively, you had what is called lazarettos all along the border between what was east, which was the Ottoman Empire, and the Habsburg, you see, and what was west. And they had rules. Oh, you're coming from where? I'm coming from Istanbul. Okay, 7 days of lazaretto. And it worked in both directions. If you came from Paris, okay, 9 days to go into the Ottoman Empire. So they had rules and mechanism to prevent in place, okay? And then they deactivated the lazarettos at quiet times and reactivated very quickly. It took us a year in the United States to realize what's going on. It took us actually 13 months to require negative PCRs while entering this country. So 13 months. So the Ottoman Empire would have been 2 days.
So you're both talking about how this was, predictable, and there were, SARS, for example, and we should have learned from that, but we didn't do that. And learning from error is also an important part of being anti-fragile, isn't it? So Nassim Nicholas Taleb, would you say that now are we safer because of
we're a lot better
COVID?
off? Yeah, we're better off because the world is rational. And like after a plane crash, the next plane ride will be safer. So we were extremely lucky to get this virus and not another one. It could have been a lot worse, or something like bacteria that is antibiotic sensitive, escaping hospitals. That would have been a lot worse. So we were lucky, and now we're prepared for the next one. And we're having this conversation online, which shows that effectively, some companies can make, as we say in New York, make lemonade out of lemons. Lemon being a misfortune, and you make lemonade out of it. And I'm going to give you an example, actually, of people who have benefited from this pandemic. A friend of mine owns a gym in California, And the gyms, as you know, were the hardest hit because nobody wants to go to the gym to get infected. So the first 2 days, he, of course, was depressed, didn't know where to go, didn't know what to do. And of course, being an entrepreneur, he said, oh, I'm going to make lemonade out of this lemon. So he started a company manufacturing home equipment and equipping people, and made a fortune. And he said, listen, I got rich out of the pandemic. I would never been spurred into starting this business. And he said, listen, I have 400 members or 500 members in my gym. At least 100 or 150 of them would want to have a gym at home. You see? And sure enough, he sold not 150, but thousands of gyms. He equipped 1,000 homes. He has a company now that does just that, for example. So here's someone who said, okay, there is a crisis. It's affecting me. I'm not going to, sit, cry and ask for the government, to subsidize my lifestyle. I'm going to go ahead and grasp the opportunity. And sure enough, he did it. And I know many cases of people like that, like waiters in restaurants. They lost their job, and they figured out that you can make a lot of money in the delivery business. A lot of old people didn't want to leave their homes in New York. So, and instead of making $15 an hour, they're making $50 an hour in the delivery business. So you just have to look at every single crisis as a potential opportunity somewhere. Maybe it's not, you're not going to find opportunity, but at least you must try. And that's the approach people need to take while in life in general. They're just saying every problem must be an opportunity.
So it's all about sort of grasping that opportunity. And, as those two examples you gave, people who just, change their businesses and find a way to sort of gain from this disorder and from this crisis. And the concept that you were talking about before that was sort of error and learning from error. Yes. And I'd be interested to hear from Cyril Vigneron about that, because that's obviously, we're here in the context we're talking to a lot of entrepreneurs who are listening here today, and failing, how do you fail fast, and how do you learn from failure is something that many entrepreneurs are thinking about, and is also a key concept in becoming anti-fragile. How do you think about this, Cyril Vigneron? What do you do in order to make sure that you fail fast and fail in a way that you learn something from?
Well, first, there is something where you can learn and even without failing. You can see some new contexts. So, for instance, when you see, well, the entire supply chain has been disrupted, how can I think about it differently? And to say, rather than having a centralized different system, you can have a distributed one. And so you can change the system, then it becomes structurally less anti-fragile. The other part, also what Nassim said before, you have to be careful that if you fail, it doesn't kill you. So there may be some part, a protective part, that some failure, are fatal. So you have to make sure that these fatal mistakes don't happen, and that you create a learning culture for those. They say, first, let's say they're small mistakes, so to just forget them, just solve the issue, that's all. Medium mistakes, you have to learn. And then the big one you avoid, and the big one, the CEO has to resign. There's something quite a responsibility, or something that come later about skin in the game. If you took something, it's a big mistake, you have to take responsibility for it. And a super big one, meaning the company can collapse. So there is some part that should not be just fail. There is something you should not fail first. And then the part there's some question on whether you can know of the expected result or you can't. If you can, it's better to do some small testing and constantly try things and to see which one work, which one not work. The worst is to fail without noticing, the slow crash. You can have sometimes so strong conviction, especially if you're kind of an ivory tower, that you say, this is my strategy, I will deliver whatever happened because I want to be determined. And it may come to exactly opposite result that you wanted and you don't notice. So first, you have to notice when you're wrong direction. And second, if you can test things in the middle and put things which are more on the ground that have a good result for it. if you take even some anti-crisis policy of how should people behave when they face a pandemic, you probably will not find the appropriate measures because it's very difficult to know which single context and what they have to face. So you have to have more this part having small testing and small failures than having the big one that come just by surprise or that even coming without you noticing. So we have, for instance, creating some retail lab, which are one in Brooklyn, one in Shanghai, and they immediately test what they come up through with the retail team. And it works much better than having something, a centralized team only in Switzerland, try to find what will be good for retail customers in China and in the US, because anyway they behave differently. So do testing, test the market, do something which are localized, and in some way you have a lot of little failures that come at the end to more learning than try to put everything on big project, centralized driven, that may come to bigger errors that might be more difficult to get out.
That's a very interesting point about, you want to fail, but you want your failures to be small, and therefore you can set yourself up in a way that's much more localized. So Cyril Vigneron is talking about this, from the perspective of a business leader within a business. But Nassim Nicholas Taleb, is this a lesson for the world after the pandemic?
Definitely.
that localism is better? We shouldn't have these very fragile global supply chains that can just collapse, as we will see.
Exactly. I mean, I'm going to give a metaphor before answering you, a metaphor of two kind of companies: companies that have very steady earnings and companies that have volatile earnings. Well, a lot of people think that companies with very steady earnings are healthier. Not true. The bankruptcies typically affect companies that have very steady earnings, because if you have volatile earnings, you will learn. You will learn. If you have drop in earnings, you'll figure out what's going on. You know what? Maybe there's an opportunity there. Maybe I'm doing something. So you will learn from the drop in earnings. You learn just like your body. Your body communicates with the environment via stressors. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work with your brain. If I lift weight, you see that stressor on my bones will make me upregulate and get better. So companies upregulate under stressors. And let me give you a personal thing that applies to personal lives. We hear a lot about post-traumatic disorder, PTSD. Yeah, a lot, but something 10 times more frequent is post-traumatic growth, except that psychologists don't talk about it. They're not going to make money selling cures for post-traumatic growth, so they don't talk about it. Post-traumatic growth is when you experience a shock in your life, you get better, you upregulate. Just like when you lift weight, you get stronger. Just like when you go in the sun, your skin, codes for more UV, and is more resistant now. So same thing, people in their lives who have had problems, 9 times out of 10 will experience growth from it. As post-traumatic growth is behind the success of a lot of companies. You have a little bit of problem. So you must have a small problem every day. Just like scientific discovery doesn't come from people thinking about problems. It comes from people tinkering. You try, you make a mistake. It's called trial and error. And error is not a bad word in science. When it's trial and error, it's trial. You trial and error. The company is trial and error. You try. You will never know unless you try. So you try. You have to make sure, as our friend said, that it doesn't cost you much, that errors are bounded. And the whole idea of antifragile is that when your errors cost you less than what you will make if you're right. So you have more upside, small downside. A lot of small downside. So you probe uncertainty by tinkering, by trying things. And you probe uncertainty that way because it costs you very little. Just like I want to find a recipe for a good, canard à l'orange. Well, I take a recipe and I tinker. Okay, it's a small mistake. My guest may not be happy, but the next guest will be happy.
It depends on how hungry you are. Yeah.
Exactly. So what I meant is so there are two classes of mistakes, as Cyril had pointed out. One, some that kill you, and some that make you stronger. And you have to figure out ahead of time which one will kill you.
Because that's a common misunderstanding about your work, I'd say, or especially about this concept of anti-fragility, that some people who probably haven't read the book as you know, as thoroughly as they should, they tend to talk about it almost that being anti-fragile means that what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. But that's not at all what you say.
I have an analogy in the physical world. If I jump 1 meter, my bones will get stronger. If I jump 10 meters, they won't, you see, I'd be gone.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's exactly. So they're not the same. It's not the same mechanism. Something is good for you and something is bad for you. It's the same. It's just a matter of dosage.
And that's exactly what you were talking about, Cyril Vigneron, right? About that, you know, error is fine, but it's about really avoiding those catastrophic failures. That's the most important thing.
Yes. So to illustrate also what the post-traumatic growth, you know, in 2010, 2013 had been for luxury one of the fastest growth. And probably the next phase from now until 2023 will be also a period of really fast, robust growth. But so not so many are seeing it now. But so those who see can probably buy capacity and so forth is about a cheap cost. But those who wait too long, it will not be possible anymore. So but there's something, it happened already 10 years ago. So it's not, again, something you can anticipate. But saying that if you make the same mistakes or dismantling your capacity now when it's too late, then you would probably regret it later on. And at some moment, you can make some really bad choices that make you really, really weaker and let all the space to the others. So I say, what kills me makes my opponent stronger. It's not me.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So we have to avoid that.
So, and this concept of tinkering, then, Cyril Vigneron, how do you tinker?
So as I mentioned, by doing if you say some research department, they should be distributed to have a manufacturing lab, a retail lab, a supply chain one, and they all communicate, but they are close to the field. They are close to where you can experiment. If you do something too much kind of R&D, which are too remote from everything, it doesn't work. Then also, if you think there is a good idea somewhere, let's try it right away and not try to conceptualize too much. And especially if there are things where you don't know if it might be or not be a good idea, just try. And then you get some surprises, some becoming really, really great and others just not working. And those who don't work, then you stop and you learn from them, that's all. So there are many ways, whether it's on products, on development, communication, on retail, many things that you can just test and learn from.
Yeah, so this concept of tinkering, I think, is familiar to many entrepreneurs because I think it comes quite natural to the entrepreneur. Nassim Nicholas Taleb, I mean, you did discuss entrepreneurs and how they are often, but not always, naturally more anti-fragile. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, so the whole business of entrepreneurship is you try till you hit it big. Okay, the only problem is that in technology, you see, you have one winner and 2,000 losers. You see, that's the problem with technology. But there are a lot of areas in which you have one winner and maybe 2 losers, and you try again. So, you must try. So the whole idea of entrepreneurship is misunderstood. How do we lift the world out of poverty? Not by, bankrolling civil servants and sending them to Africa. No, we build 1 billion people out of poverty. Okay, thanks to entrepreneurs, economic growth. Teach people to fail, because when they're young, they can fail many, many times. Recover, learn from it, use that post-traumatic growth, and continue. So teach people to fail. There's a lot of culture where it's very shameful to fail.
And to comment on that for the community that we have with women's entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, the fact to put them in community also help because they can learn from each other. Some of the entrepreneurs are small businesses who find lonely. If you can put a community where everyone can share, then all the community can learn from each other's failures as well, or get also some network to get the options to find what they cannot find on their own. So the network and having a group in some way increases much more the chances of survival and the learning phase, rather when you're just alone and you have to find on your own, on only your own experiments and your own experience.
Which is also
interestingly, the highest bankruptcy rate in the world is in the United States. And within the United States, where is it? In Silicon Valley. The areas, so the higher the rate of bankruptcy, that's a paradox, the more dynamic and more successful the area is going to be. You see, so you have, it's like generalized tinkering, where the entire country is tinkering via entrepreneurs to get better, and that's how that's how the world improves.
So one of the reasons why entrepreneurs are more anti-fragile, if I understand your work correctly, is because entrepreneurs tend to have skin in the game. What does that mean?
Okay, so let me. It's at many levels. Okay, skin in the game means that you pay for the harm you cause to others. In other words, that you can't harm others without being harmed yourself. If you drive on a highway, you will notice, I mean, that it's relatively safe. Okay, you don't have a not driving, killing 30, 40 people anymore. Why? Because these people are already gone. So those who tend to be dangerous to others are also dangerous to themselves. So that's my idea of skin in the game. So it is a condition that you must not put others at risk without incurring the same risks yourself. In the old days, of course, warmongers were first in line. Hannibal, Alexander, Julius Caesar. As a matter of fact, they were even more exposed than others. And 2/3 of Roman emperors died of a non-natural death, assuming the others were not poisoned. Okay. So this is the base of the idea. But then there is the learning, tinkering thing that comes with it. This is as follows. A friend of mine, when I retired from trading, I went into academia. A friend of mine decided to lose his money slowly in the restaurant business. Okay. So he went and invested in a restaurant. And he noticed that restaurants, have like a subculture of awards. So, and the restaurant that get a huge award by critics and stuff like that were likely to go bankrupt sometimes before the gala dinner where they give you the award. Okay. So why? Because the restaurants that focus on pleasing the critics are different from those who focus on pleasing their clients. Basically, you should be judged by the credit card. That's skin in the game. You have contact with the end product, with reality. And it's absent in government when it becomes very large, and present in government when it's small, as in Switzerland. You see, you have a contact with the end product, which is your customer. You don't want to impress your critic. You want to impress your accountant and your client. Okay, so this is sort of the idea of skin in the game. And I noticed in academia that because I have been an academic now for 13 years, full-time, or sort of like with full title, and I noticed that they're not interested in the end product. They're interested in impressing other academics. So I tell people, the plumber, is he trying to impress the other plumber? Or is he trying to impress you? If he's trying to impress the client, okay, so the business is going to be healthy and it's easy to detect expertise. But there are businesses where you're just trying to impress your peers, as like academia, with a lot of fields, government, academia. Government becomes large, not when it's small. Large corporations. Okay, where you
but entrepreneurs don't often have less of that problem, is what you're saying.
Yeah, of course, entrepreneurs are trying to, have direct contact with reality. If the product failed, they have failed. You see, and it's not the judgment, and they're not relying. They can win the prize of the best entrepreneur. Okay, in Manhattan, they can win any prize they want. Okay, put it on the wall of their living room. But you know what? If the product failed, they did fail.
So it's not about the process, it's about being anti-fragile, and one way to set yourself up like that is learning from error. It's about more local systems, and it's about tinkering. So thank you so much.
There's one little caveat here, sorry to interrupt, to say that you should not steal anti-fragility from others. Because a lot of people, like bankers in the 80s, they would they would be anti-fragile. In other words, a shock would not harm them. Why? Because they're transferring the risk to the taxpayer or to their shareholders. But that's pretty much over.
And that's where the concept of skin in the game comes in, is about
Yes.
not transferring risk to others. So we're going to have to end here for now. Thank you so much, Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Thank you so much, Cyril Vigneron, for this, this hopefully very enlightening, it's been very enlightening to me, this discussion. And in the next session, which will be led by philanthropist and journalist Maria Shriver, we will be hearing concrete examples from business owners, how they have changed their business models to become more anti-fragile in this crisis, and how their work has also made their communities more anti-fragile. My name is Katrine Marsal. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.